All right, my friends. I want to tell you how I came to this title and where I want to go. It was a strange origin, actually. I was reading a blog, the Torah.com. It's a weekly newsletter, or multiple times a week on the Torah portion. That was introduced about 10 years ago, and it attempts to bring together scholarly analysis and religious meaning. It's a wonderful, wonderful source and resource. So I think if you're interested, the Torah.com, and it's just it's very enriching, and it's full of at this point, an archive of wonderful teachings. So I reread something that really struck me. First of all, the author. The author noted himself as Yoel of Satmar. Now, that has significance in some ways with regard to the name Yoel, because the founding rabbi of Satmar was Yoel. But the point here is that this is a scholarly website. And the writer is a member of the most extreme ultra-Orthodox Hasidic sect. What's he doing? So the website has reached an underground of Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox adherents who find the teachings liberating. Now, not only I think that Yoel find the teachings liberating, whatever his name is, he liberated me. He really sort of pushed me in a direction, and I'm going to share that with you in terms of what I've learned and why I'm making this, why I'm framing the teaching in this manner. All right. So we have some ground to cover, and as with the Torah.com website, it will include some reference to biblical scholarship, including archaeology, of which I know very little, and a reflection on the teachings of my teacher, Rabbi Soloveitchik, who often taught classes about the meaning of Passover and the significance of the experience, the slave experience in Egypt. All right, so that's where we begin. As an introductory point, there's a source that I didn't bring you, but let me mention it. In Leviticus chapter 23, there's a calendar, and the calendar lists all the holidays. Interestingly enough, the calendar begins with a Sabbath, but the Sabbath isn't a holiday. It's Shabbos. The holidays are determined by the calendar. The Shabbos is determined by every 7 days. If you're lost in the desert, you count 7 days. It has nothing to do with the cycle of nature. It's independent of nature. So what's the Shabbos doing in a calendar of holidays? Unless, and this is the point where we're going, that the essential dimension of Shabbos is its link to the Exodus. And that's what we're going to get to. Meaning that the depiction of Shabbos, we're going to see in a moment, in the Deuteronomic 10 Commandments as a remembrance of the Exodus is not accidental, nor is it something that's tagged on. It's part of the very institution of Shabbos and explains what Shabbos is really all about. And this was, made clear to me. And, we've got it wrong. So let's begin the study. So let's start upside down with a passage from Deuteronomy, and then to the passage in the Exodus. Many of you may know that the Shabbos commandment is mentioned twice mentioned more than twice, but it's mentioned in both versions of the 10 Commandments, obviously, because one is a repeat of the other. Deuteronomy repeats the Exodus 10 Commandments, except that of all the commandments, aside from some minor differences in the commandment of coveting, minor differences, there are major differences in the presentation of the Shabbos commandment. So that in Deuteronomy we read as follows: observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Shamor et Yom HaShabbat. Those of you who are familiar with the biblical text will immediately recognize that we are familiar with the Exodus text, which says on the bottom here, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat. Zachor being to what is that?
That was someone who unmuted themselves.
Okay, all right, okay. So please be careful. All right, so you see here the distinction between Shamor in Deuteronomy and Zachor in Exodus. I'm going to come back to that. And all right, so the commandment continues. Keep it holy as the Lord your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But on the 7th day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. You shall not do any work. You, your son or your daughter, your male or your female slave, your ox or your ass, or any of your cattle, or the stranger in your settlement, so that your male and female slave may rest as you do. Okay? May rest as you do. Remember, that's really important. Leman yanuach avdecha. The Hebrew is a little bit, is not in order, but the phrase in Hebrew is here. Leman yanuach avdecha va'amatcha kamocha. We're going to come back to that. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God freed you from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. I thought we were commanded to observe the Sabbath day because God created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th day. That's not what it says. In Exodus, it says, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days shall labor, but on the 7th day do not work. You, your son, your daughter, your male or female slave, your cattle, stranger, right, and your settlements. Same, except, and we'll come back to that in a moment. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth and the sea and all that is in them, and God rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath. Right? Bless the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Right? So let's look at the differences. Maybe you noted them already, right? Difference number 1, Shamor, Zachor, right? Observe, keep, guard. Zachor, remember, memory. Shamor intimates some action, I would say, right? Do something. Zachor also do something, but it's a memory function. Here we have a list of all the people who have to rest. It's quite similar. I don't think there are any differences, except for the final phrase, so that your male and female slave may rest as you do. Now, I'm gonna say the word as you do in Hebrew is kamocha. I hope you all can recognize, where is kamocha from? V'ahavta l'rayacha kamocha. We'll come back to that. Remember that. That's really vital in terms of understanding what's happening here and how the Shabbat is being presented. And then, of course, the major difference is the reason for Shabbat. Exodus versus creation. And the language here is fascinating. Al kain berach, therefore God blessed the Sabbath day and sanctified it. In other words, it's theological and religious. Al kain sivacha Hashem Elokecha, therefore God commanded you to do, right, on the Sabbath day. So there's a command to observe and to relate, to somehow extend the Shabbos, to translate the Shabbos. It's not a matter of memorializing. You have to activate the Shabbos. How do you activate the Shabbos? Because the Shabbos is connected to the Exodus. So it's the principles of Exodus that have to be activated on the basis, on the grounds of the Shabbos. Now, the rabbis said, all right, so actually let me summarize for a moment where we're at. So the Shabbos has both a sort of a social justice reason. Right? Remember that you were slaves. Shabbos is a day of equality, right? To commemorate the Exodus, you are obligated to somehow bring that into practice. Shabbos is a holy day. It's a day that commemorates God's creation of the world. And it's a day in which, in effect, we abstain from creation and from interaction with with the physical universe, with creativity. I'm sorry, outside of ourselves, right? Because of its spiritual, religious dimension. Now, why did I put Deuteronomy before Exodus? Even though clearly, right, Exodus in the Bible comes first. And this is where sort of Yoel, whom I mentioned earlier, helped me out. And I've been so suspicious of this for years, that the innovation of Shabbos is not that it's a day to celebrate the fact that God rested on the seventh day, that it commemorates creation. The real innovation of Shabbos is that it introduces a labor law, that all human beings are due a day of rest. It was revolutionary, transformative. Nobody knew that everyone deserves to rest one day. I think I've mentioned this before. In Antiquity, the machines were running, so-called machines in quotation marks, 24 hours, 24/7. Slaves had no rest. Of course, they slept, right? But they worked constantly. There was no such, and it wasn't just slaves. People worked constantly. Only the nobles were able to somehow have some leisure. There was no such notion of menuchat, of rest. So Shabbos was introduced as a change in the nature of civilization. The innovation is the social legislation that everyone deserves a day of rest. Then, and this we can amplify and somehow support, because we know a little bit about the history of the emergence of the biblical text. The creation story is actually added to the Bible very late. It's what scholars identify as priestly. It reflects a sort of theological frame for the Bible that's introduced here regarding Shabbos in Exodus as a way of anchoring what was a social innovation in a divine framework, so that the innovative dimension of Shabbos on the social realm, which is revolutionary, has the support, not only the support, the complete sort of push of God's imprimatur. God grants the Shabbos his imprimatur. Now I want to push this argument further. Until the Shabbos was introduced as the day of rest, there was no weekly cycle. The Hebrews are responsible, and this is borne out by contemporary scholarship, for introducing the 7-day week. It passed from Hebrew culture through the Sea Peoples to Europe and was accepted as the mode, as the framework for how the week was going to be experienced. But nobody knew about the week. The week was shaped by the fact that at the end of the week, there was a day of rest. And then you were able to start again. So what the Torah does is brilliant. Because in other words, this is a great innovation. So from a religious perspective, how do we swallow this? How do we absorb this innovation? So the tradition tells us that Shabbos is the culmination of the 7 days of God's creation. So the creation story was introduced in service of the Shabbos. So rather than what most of us have been taught, which is because God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh day, therefore we have Shabbos. It's the opposite. Because we have Shabbos, the Torah tells us that the world was created in 6 days and God rested on the seventh day. Do you understand what I'm saying? In other words, the Shabbos is that which was the what's the word I'm looking for? The cause for the introduction of the 7-day weekly cycle. And no one, this I've said before, I think, I certainly taught students this, that no one is making the claim that the world was created in 7 days. That's ridiculous. Rashi says that that's not what it's all about. Even though, I mean, Rashi doesn't have all the modern background, but he knows that this is not the story of how the world came into being. It's the story of an idea. It's a story about meaning. It's a story about how to live life. It's not the story about what happened. What happened is introduced in service of providing us with a meaningful life that reaches for transcendence, for some sense of the divine in our experience. All right, so I think we have a sense here. The Shabbos is introduced as a universal law of rest for everyone. There's the connection to the Exodus is that it's an equalizer. There's no master, there's no slave. There's no store owner and there's no shopper. There's no worker and there is no boss. All society is leveled. The memory of the Exodus, where there was a hierarchy and people and Pharaoh lorded over Israel, is erased, or there's an attempt to erase that structure that dominates and generates oppression in the world. So Shabbos is an institution whose purpose is to eradicate the oppression of the vulnerable and introduce them to the possibility of a life of meaning. And we know we have a lot of evidence in terms of Jewish experience, in terms of what it meant for Jews. Now, some of you know, or may be familiar to you, the passage from L'Chadodi, the first paragraph in L'Chadodi, which is, I saw this last week, someone called it the hymn of the Jewish people, right? The theme song of the Jewish people. The first passage is Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad. Observe and remember were uttered in one utterance. Now, what does that mean? So, I mean, the general explanation is that God can say multiple things at once. But b'dibur echad means the following, and this is where we're going in our teaching, that religion and ethics are one. You can't be religious without the ethical dimension. And the religious argument, not everybody would accept it. The religious argument is that you can't be ethical without some sense of the divine. Now, I'll try to say something about that. I know that's problematic for many people. But Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad means that there's an intermingling, that there's a meshing. The Shabbos in Exodus and the Shabbos in Deuteronomy are one. Remembering that God is the creator and remembering that we left Egypt and equality for all humanity. That's one. There's something one. There's oneness about that, and that we carry that as Jews as part of our identity. Now, just to sort of illustrate, and we can't read this as carefully as one would like. I brought here a passage from Isaiah 58 that with which you're very familiar, because it's the Haftorah for Yom Kippur, and I think you will recall the Haftorah for Yom Kippur. Why, when we fasted, did you not see? The people ask. When we starved our bodies, did you not heed? Because on your fast day, you see, God says, to your business and oppress all your laborers, because you fast in strife and contention, and you strike with a wicked fist. Your fasting today is not such as to make your voice heard on high. Is such the fast I desire, says God, a day for men to starve their bodies? That you think I want the ritual? Is it bowing the head like a bulrush and lying in sackcloth and ashes? Do you call that a fast? A day when the Lord is favorable? No, This is the fast I desire, to unlock fetters of wickedness and untie the cords of yoke, to let the oppressed go free, to break off every yoke. It is to share your bread with the hungry. In other words, to be religious. God says, I'm not opposed to fasting. In fact, I understand the ritual as a way of implementing the values and ingraining them, implanting them within you as a practice. You need the practice in order that the ideas become a part of who you are. And that in order to develop the ethical personality, there's a mode, at least from a religious perspective. There are obligations. There are obligations that we have to carry with us that need to be introduced. And that practice somehow cultivates, nurtures within us, helps us nurture a commitment and an ethical nature, so that we are so that we can potentially become virtuous, which means that at a certain point, because we become adept at the practice, then morality, the ethical behavior becomes natural. Right? It's no longer something that we have to struggle with, because we've trained our personality in that mode. That's a lifetime. That's a lifetime. So yes, fast on Yom Kippur, but know why you're fasting. You can't oppress people and fast and expect that I'm gonna pay attention to you, right? That's hypocritical. Right? So the central institution here, the central idea is that the ethics need to be an expression of the religious idea. Now, I want to go back to the language. I said I would. Shamor v'zachor. So zachor, which is related to remembering that God is the creator, has to do with a sense of entering the holy domain on the Shabbos, the spiritual dimension of Shabbos. Okay, I think that Shamor indicates keep the Shabbos so that you can carry on the task of transforming the world, so that the world becomes a place of humanity, of human values. So Shamor, in other words, develop a practice of how to be a Shabbos person. And to be a Shabbos person, it's not sufficient just to have a holy day. I can tell a Shabbos person by the way they live during the week. I always say the following, how do you greet people on Monday morning? Because on Shabbos, how do you greet people on Shabbos? You say Shabbat Shalom. So the real test is, on Monday morning, are you saying Monday Shalom? In other words, what's different about the days of the week in Hebrew is that they have no names and that there's no particular greeting for them. So it's up in the air. It depends on who you are. So Shabbos is a retreat. Have you learned on the Shabbos how to extend the values, the sense of peace that you've reached on the Shabbos, equality, into the week itself? And does that become a guide for how you construct your social reality and your politics? So,
do we have time for a few questions?
Yes, please. Yes, right now it's a good time.
Harry, did you want to ask your question? Would you like me to ask for you?
2 questions.
Okay.
First, what's the importance of 7 days as opposed to 10 days or 14 days?
Okay.
Or some other number of days? And entirely separate, isn't the passage from Isaiah, or doesn't the passage from Isaiah in conflict with the 2 earlier passages, both of which seem to justify and or accept the practice of slavery?
All right. Okay. All right. So first of all, if you allow me, I'll answer the question on slavery, even though I was going to talk about it. But all right, no problem. So 7 days. Why 7 days? Because we know a few things. In ancient Babylonia, they divided they actually created a calendar based on a 30-day month with a type of we think, I mean, there are expressions of this a 6-day cycle. So that's the point. In other words, there was a known 6-day cycle. So the 7th day was the add-on. That's made it different. In other words, that was the novel initiative of the Hebrews to introduce to what was a pattern of 6, of 5 units of 6. In Antiquity, something like that, adding on a 7th day. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that we have a type of quasi-7 cycle based on the moon, with the phases of the moon. So Shabbos abstracted the natural phases of the moon and took the week away from nature, from any relationship to natural bodies, so that there's no intimation of worship of nature, and then created its own 7 days. So there is a basis for 7 days in Antiquity, either the 6-day unit of time or the 7-day cycle, lunar cycle, lunar quarters in the month. And we actually have more than that, because there's an Akkadian and ancient Semitic word, Shabbatu, which sort of suggests our Shabbat, which has to do with cessation, but the celebration or the memorial, the commemoration of Shabbatu is completely different. It's not a blessed day. In some aspects, the phases of the moon were days in which we had to lie low and fear the gods. That's why the Torah says, Al Kain Beirach Hashem et Yom HaShabbat. The Shabbos is a blessed day, not a cursed day. You not only fear God, you get closer to God on the Sabbath. All right, so that's 7. All right, both were excellent questions. The slavery question. All right, so what I would say to you is that Shabbos is precisely slavery is a reality. The same question you have regarding the Torah is the question that we have regarding the Declaration of Independence. What kind of document is it? What kind of people are we? We live in a country where slavery was not only tolerated, it was legal. However, there was a process for undoing slavery. We're still struggling with it, I must say, and the after effects of slavery in American society. But I've talked before about this, that basically what you see in the Torah is there's a reality. Slavery is what's known. God, Maimonides says in the guide, is a good educator and doesn't wish to take people from 0 to 100 all at once, knowing that that would fail. So the process of undoing, eradicating slavery is a gradual process. And Shabbos is one of the institutions that's introduced by the Torah as an undoing of slavery, precisely because of the phrase in Deuteronomy, so that your manservant and your maidservant may rest as you do. That phrase, kamocha, v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, they're like you. Once the Torah introduces that consciousness, there can be no mistake that that hierarchy is legitimate. All human beings share as God's creation. And you see slowly but surely the legislation that the Torah introduces, sort of a weakening of slavery, so that eventually it becomes highly well. I don't want to claim that Jews are so righteous. The Jews owned slaves, and Jews were involved in the South in a small community, but they were involved for sure. That's a whole other subject. However, there's a very strong thrust in the Jewish tradition that recognizes that Torah legislation and Jewish law is about the undoing of slavery and promoting equality. I'm going to get to in fact, I'm going to say some more about this right now. Does that answer your question, Perry?
For the most part.
All right, then we have to continue. All right. So I now this.
Rabbi Chaim,
yes.
We have one more question by chat. It's so hard. I hate interrupting you.
Right.
Sheldon asks, can we apply the same constructs to slavery and racism in America?
I don't, no, say more.
Yeah, I don't quite understand. Sheldon, do you want me to unmute you?
Yeah, please. Sheldon?
Sheldon?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Please.
So you said that slavery for the for the Jewish people, the Israeli people, God understood it as to you can't go from 0 to 100. Basically, it has to be evolved over time.
Right.
And can you say that? So I'm wondering, can you then apply that same concept and idea to the views about our history of slavery in America?
Yeah,
And
yeah. So
in the process, we tried to undo that as well as racism.
yeah. So that's what I was suggesting when I mentioned the Constitution. That the same Constitution that allows for slavery also becomes the basis for undoing slavery. That's in other words, that's a known legal process, and people shouldn't be so how should they shocked by all of this, and by the fact that the ancient Israel countenanced slavery. I mean, that was the way of the world. What you have here is an ideal and a push towards achieving that ideal. As long as you maintain a critical perspective, I think, and understand that the slavery in the Bible is not meant to justify continued slavery in history, which is exactly what some peoples have done. Dutch Reformed Church in South Africa, many people have used the Bible as a justification for slavery. Right? So in answer to your question, indeed, although I'm not an American legal scholar, I believe that the same process is something that I think was set in motion by the framers and the founders, who themselves couldn't undo what some of them knew should be undone, and they sort of gave they created the mechanism by which later generations undid something that was judged to be evil. Yes, Perry.
I want to make a comment about the question, because I think your answer is valid with respect to the racism part of the question, but your answer is not valid with regard to the slavery part of the question, because the Emancipation Proclamation and the 14th Amendment went from 0 to 100, at least on paper.
Yeah. Yes, but right.
That's my point.
Okay. All right. It's a good. I mean, it's a good point. The fact is that and it's a good distinction. But also recognize that there'd been a society developing here for a while, and there was one, and I mean, there were reasons. There were reasons. Okay, but and I'm not an American historian, but okay, point well taken. Okay, so now let me just read a little bit. I want you to hear a little bit of this next text. It's 2 pages long, so you can read most of it on your own, but I want you to get a flavor. It's written by Hermann Cohen. Hermann Cohen was a Jewish philosopher who died in the early part of the 20th century. He's known to be a neo-Kantian, and let me, I want to write a note. And his thinking is considered to be the basis for what goes by the name of ethical monotheism, which is the grounding of Reform Judaism. So, but that's where denominations sell people short. That's not a true depiction of who Hermann Cohen was. So I want you to hear what he has to say. Already the two reasons that the Decalogue gives for this law, Shabbos, are a telling example of the fundamental value of the Sabbath. In Exodus it says, and he says what it says, he quotes it, rest for the servant and for the maidservant is already prescribed there, but it is not considered the cause of the law, for this is rather God's rest from the work of creation, as in the account of creation in Genesis. And then he goes on, Deuteronomy displays its entire spirit of social and ethical reform in this law. With the exception of the prohibition of coveting, nothing is changed in the Decalogue but the law of the Sabbath. For after the enumeration of the particular persons, as well as the animals to which the law relates, it says, in order that the manservant and thy maidservant may rest as well as thou, as you do. And thou shalt remember that thou was a servant in the land of Egypt, and the eternal God brought you out of there. All right, already the introductory word is changed. Whereas in Exodus it says remember, here observe. And whereas it says there, therefore the eternal bless the Sabbath day, and therefore the therefore is here changed by making it now refer back to God's commandment, the reason for which has already been set forth, that thy manservant and thy maidservant may rest as well as you. This as well as thou, kamocha, is the same phrase that is also used in the commandment to love one's neighbor. Thus already from the literary evidence, from the change in the wording of the Decalogue, with respect to this law, and from the motivation behind this change, it is beyond doubt that the Sabbath is meant to secure the equality of people in spite of the differences in their social standing. And this indisputably clarified meaning of the Sabbath is in turn an unsurpassed documentation of the fundamental morality of monotheism and of its moral originality. All right, so the Shabbos is the embodiment of God's love, because God gives the world this day of rest to recognize human equality before God, it introduces, it legislates a mode of preserving that sense that egalitarian sense that no human being has the right to lord it over another human being. Now, what's interesting, and by the way, just a side point here, I'll say that this Shabbos was attractive because we see, Ubnei Hanechar says Isaiah, as for the foreigners who attach themselves to the Lord to minister to God and to love the name of the Lord, to be his servants, all who keep the Sabbath and do not profane it, and who hold fast to my covenant. Meaning that there were ancient Near Eastern Gentiles who observed the Sabbath. They didn't become Jews. They were attracted by what they understood to be something novel, something innovative, something transformative in the institutions and the way of life of the people of the people of Israel, and they wanted to attach themselves to that. And Isaiah says these people are invited in. They can be part of the community, and they don't have to. And there's no sense that they have to become Jewish. This reflects an understanding that the Shabbos has a universal dimension. It's not intended just for Jews. The rules of Shabbos are particular. The mode of observance is Jewish, but the nature of Sabbath, that's for humanity. And it seems to me that we have not been up to the task of promoting something of great value without arrogance. In other words, the point is not to coerce anybody and not to convince anybody we have it, it's best, but to be able to say this is a gift. The Shabbos is a gift, and in potential, it is part of other religious cultures. It just has waned in the last the last generation. There's no longer a sense that there's any day off from shopping and working and acquiring, right? And of enslavement. Instead of being slaves to Pharaoh, we enslave ourselves. So the freedom there's a dimension of freedom here in the notion of Sabbath. So it's our task to present this. The whole world is waiting to sing a song of Shabbos, and we're not singing. Okay, we could sing the Song of Shabbos. And we see from Antiquity that there were those who wanted to join in. Now, I want to give this, before I'm going to have to move on, but there's a section here that where I said I would go to some sort of archaeological evidence in ancient Israel. We know something about ancient Israel, and I've learned a lot from my friend and teacher Yisrael Knoll, who's the head of the Bible department at the Hebrew University and a fellow at the Hartman Institute. He's written a number of books of late that have sort of given voice to his research and I think to his very innovative understanding of how Israel developed as a people. Now, one of the things that they've discovered is that the early settlement of Israelites that was comprised of, and you know, this is sort of a revision of what we read in the Bible, because the Bible gives us sort of a general picture, that there was an exodus and the tribes settled in Canaan. Well, the depiction by scholars is not precisely that way. Yes, there was a group that left from Egypt, but there were already inhabitants, Israelite tribes that were in Canaan. And of course, there were the Canaanites. So the tribes that came from Egypt united with others that were in the land, and there may have been even a third group of people who simply joined them to create a new society. Now that society is reflected in the Bible in the period of the Judges. What do we know about the period of the Judges? That Israel existed without a king. There was no edited the book, and they criticized the period of the Judges as being a period of anarchy. Not at all, says the archaeological evidence. On the contrary, the period where the Israelite peoples were organizing. How did they organize? They organized in hundreds of villages. We have evidence of their living. Their living quarters were simple. There was no central construction in their villages that indicated any degree of wealth or a hierarchy where someone was greater than the other. And for archaeologists, something that I know nothing at all about, the pottery it indicates everything, because there is pottery from the prior period that's colored and designed, and there's pottery from the following period. That also reflects what I call greater artistic sophistication and decoration. The pottery of the period of the Judges is not decorated. It's simple. We also don't have any grave markers. These were people who did not commemorate people with graves. That already indicates a cult and the importance of someone. People who have more money create, more of a memorial to the person who passed away. Everything is simple. This was what the scholars suggest was the closest to an egalitarian society that we have. Deborah, in her poetry, in her song of victory, calls the people Am Hashem. This is the people of God. This is not Am Yisrael. And by the way, Yisrael, the root, although we tend popularly, according to the Bible, to interpret it to mean Sarita Elohim v'man Hashem v'tuchal. You struggled with God and with humans, and you were victorious. The etymology is Yashar El or Yasor El, which means God rules. The point being, God alone rules. There is no other ruler. This is a type of pure monotheism that responds to the mode of polytheistic worship and cult with an egalitarian society where morality is bred in to the very being and structure of the society. This is the society of the Exodus. They came out of Egypt. They saw what inequality was all about. They instituted a new way of living, which they were able to sustain for a couple hundred years. In the middle of it all, we know this. A second. Oh, my low system. How's my audio quality? Is it okay? Okay, good. Okay. In the middle of it all, we read in the book of Judges, fascinating. Gideon, people all know about Gideon. Gideon was victorious. Gideon was a miracle worker. What happened after Gideon's victory? I'll read it to you. Chapter 8 in Judges. Then the men of Israel said to Gideon, rule over us, you, your son, and your grandson as well, for you have saved us from the Midianites. Become our king. Become our king. But Gideon replied, I will not rule over you myself, nor shall my son rule over you. The Lord alone shall rule over you. And Gideon said to them, I have a request to make of you. Each of you give me, he goes on, okay. So Gideon refused to become the king. Right? That was the attitude of the generations of the people who lived in the period of the judges. Knoll and Buber in his writing, in his book, The Kingdom of God, considers this to be the golden age of Israelite history. Afterwards, when the monarchy came in, that's when corruption, that's when religious institutions, the priesthood, the temple, all the trappings of power and rule that Israel had learned in Egypt were dangerous and corrupting, right? All of those elements were introduced. And the struggle needed to be a struggle about how to limit the excesses that were introduced in a power structure and in an institutional structure with a hierarchy. Because the foundational society of Israel was, as Knoll and others scholars say, there's a scholar at Bar Ilan who's written about this as well, a lot. And I actually should read you a quote from William Deaver, who's the doyen of biblical archaeologists. There does appear to be a kind of primitive democracy reflected in the settlements and the remains of their material cultic life. Okay, a simplicity. All right, the 4-room house, no fancy graves, and no decorated pottery. Moreover, women emerging as leaders, never again to attain such significance as Deborah. A military leader, a judge, a prophet. And Yael, her sidekick, who aids in the victory. Women emerging as leaders point to a decentralized community. There's no structure to exclude. There are no people asserting their power and their control to exclude others. And there's an absence of icons in the burial grounds and in the mountains where they found other icons from this period, because the people were faithful to God. As I said to you, they are Am Hashem. So this is a society that's building a sense, that's trying to build from within a sense of equality to reflect the experience that they had in Egypt, and to construct a way of life that's as shivyoni, as egalitarian as possible. Now, what you have here, and I'm going to do this very quickly, are some evidence from later. So after the destruction of the temple, we have 2nd Isaiah, who tells us the following. Thus said the Lord to Cyrus, his anointed one. What's the Hebrew for anointed one? His Mashiach. Cyrus is the Mashiach. Who's the Mashiach? Mashiach ben David. The Messiah is of the house of David. 2nd Isaiah, following the destruction of the temple, introduces a theology and a social program with an absence of with the absence of the Davidic monarchy. He doesn't pray for the reinstitution of the Davidic monarchy. He doesn't prophesy the reinstitution of the Davidic monarchy. On the contrary, what he says to the people is as follows: incline your ear and come to me, hearken and you shall be revived, and I will make with you an everlasting covenant, the enduring loyalty promised to David. I'm going to transfer to you the covenant that I made with David. No longer is there an eternal covenant with the house of David to maintain the monarchy. Instead, there's an eternal covenant with the Israelite, with the Judaic people that survives and is creating this new world post destruction. And what's the characteristic of the world post destruction? So we have from Isaiah, God says, I am the Lord and there is none else besides me. There is no God. I engird you, though you have not known me, so that they may know from east to west that there is none but me. I am the Lord and there is none else. This is pure monotheism. No longer, as we heard earlier in the Bible, mi chamocha ba'elim, who is like unto you among the gods? Meaning, yes, we worship one God, but there are other gods. You are greater than all the other gods. This is a pure form where there's no recollection and no commemoration of there being a pantheon of gods, with God as the greatest among them. So this is a way of reaching beyond and trying to introduce this type of oneness. As I said earlier, with regard in the Torah, you have the oneness introduced, Shamor v'Zachor, the oneness of religious commitment and ethical commitment, Shamor v'Zachor, Exodus and creation. And in Isaiah, you have God is pure one, and the society that it reflects that pure oneness is one without hierarchy, without someone who can lord it over others and oppress others. So, so what Knoll says basically is that Second Isaiah attempts to reintroduce the period or the theology of the period of the prophets, and that's something that we have to sort of hold on to as a value in Jewish life, about what that means in terms of who we are and what the significance of our experience in exile, what it taught us. And that's where we move on to Soloveitchik and his teaching regarding Passover and his interpretation of the Exodus. Now, it's important to know, by the way, before, as an introductory word about Soloveitchik, that he wrote his dissertation on Hermann Cohen. So it's not accidental that in Soloveitchik's formulation as an Orthodox, as the dean of Orthodox Talmudists and as the basic formulator of traditional theology, that ethics figures to be central to his whole worldview and to his religiosity, because basically he accepts Cohen's conclusion that ethics is the foundation of the Jewish religion, and that the monotheistic argument is that one God is introduced in part to provide us with a framework for our having a sense of us being one, with there being a sense of equality in the world, and that morality is introduced as a type of divine command. Al kain tzivcha, therefore God commanded you to observe the Sabbath. So the Sabbath is commanded as not just a religious institution, but as a moral institution. So what's the meaning to the slavery in Egypt? I mean, I always had this question: why did we need this to be in Egypt? And in fact, there's something more pressing. It's a terrible way to begin the Bible when you think about it. I mean, it's the second book, so it's not right away. But Genesis is sort of introduction. At the end of Genesis, we all wind up in Egypt. What happens in Egypt? We become slaves to Pharaoh. It's an embarrassing way to start our story. Usually people tell their story in a glorious way. What kind of glorious story is this? We were slaves. In fact, on Passover night, when we tell the story, we're even, less complimentary. We say, Our ancestors were idolaters. I mean, we insult ourselves all the time. Why? Why? In other words, wouldn't it be more efficacious to talk about the glories of David and the victories and so on? That's what kings did in antiquity. That's what peoples did to build up their confidence. In other words, I want you to see something that's happened. There's something about the character of the Jew that the formulators of Jewish religion, that God wants us to achieve in character. That is, there's a program here. It's a project that we have to live a certain experience in order to inculcate and to implant within us certain tendencies that mark us and mark our character. And so the Exodus, slavery and Exodus become essential. And we tell the story, it's not a matter of, I mean, obviously the opposite of pride. Pride doesn't figure into this at all in telling our story. It's values. Our history is about values. Our history, by the way, it's not even necessarily about what happened factually, because we can't necessarily prove everything that happened. That's not important. What's important is how the stories, the narrative, the stories that we've been telling for thousands of years, how they shaped who we became and who we are as a people and what our preferences are, even to this very day. Now, salvation is a little bit it's a little bit idealized, but that's okay. We need to hear some idealization. So he writes as follows. The Egyptian experience may therefore be regarded as the fountainhead and moral inspiration for the teaching and compassion which is so pervasive in Jewish law. It sharpened the law's ethical sensitivity and moral awareness. The Midrash has Rabbi Nehemiah say this explicitly. The Egyptian bondage was of great value for us, since it served to implant within us the quality of kindness and mercy. In other words, thank God we were slaves. I mean, I don't know if you've heard such a formulation, but that's sort of what Seidler-Feller is saying. This was critical. In other words, in hindsight, we understand that slavery was something formative. Ours is a singularly ethical culture, which expresses itself through a heightened regard for human rights and dignity. I wish. Kavod ha-briot, respect for human dignity, and social justice are implicit in the biblical concept that humans were created in God's image. Okay, so we left Egypt with this memory of slavery that imparted to us and sort of engraved within us this sense that one community lording it over others, oppressing others, ruling over others, and a pharaoh as a ruler is something that we want to make sure that that's intolerable, and that in fact we need to give this message to the world that we have to undo that form of government, that form of rule, that form of society. And we're still working on it. I heard a report today about the Uyghurs. You know, there's slavery in our world, all around us. And even within, our own America, there's slavery. So the work of undoing slavery hasn't been completed. And we should take a special role, or we have a responsibility, right? It's a sense that we should tell ourselves that we need to be in that struggle. Now, the Deuteronomy tells us exactly what Seidler-Feller is talking about. But you, the Lord, took and brought out of Egypt that iron blast furnace. What does that mean, that iron blast furnace? The iron blast furnace, right? That's the place in which our character was refined, right? That's where we were cleansed. That's where our personality was developed to be compassionate, to develop a sense of mercy, right? That's why Egypt was essential, to mold our moral quality, right? That's the purpose. To the extent, and Seidler-Feller actually says, to the extent that a Jew becomes estranged from Jewish values, however, that person begins to manifest behavioral tendencies which prevail in the dominant culture, right? And he means to say assimilation is not merely the absence of religious observance. Assimilation is reflected in the character of people who no longer carry with them that baggage of what it means to be a Jew. Some years ago, I was speaking on the high holidays, and I started my speech in this way. I said, I need a new pair of glasses because I no longer recognize my people. These are not the same people that I know, that I grew up with. We don't have the same values. We've been transformed. That's what Soloveitch is talking about. We've eaten, we've experienced the good life. So it's hard to maintain who we are in light of what we've experienced. And we need more caution, more limitations. I think, from a religious perspective, we need to take note of the instructions of how to practice being a moral person, and understand and interpret the ritual as having moral significance. So this is a way of on a daily basis, because you live with a sense of ritual. That's how you, as I said, you inculcate, you induce within yourself a practice that helps you maintain this personality. Because the Talmud has a sort of a prejudice. It says, David said, there are three distinguishing marks of this nation, the Jewish people. They are merciful, they are shamefaced, and they perform acts of kindness. Okay, so who are we? I guess shamefaced would mean we're humble. We're merciful, meaning that we take note of the vulnerable in society, the widow, the slave, right? The oppressed. We're there on their side, and we perform acts of kindness to all. We're there to help all. These are our religious obligations. In other words, when the Talmud says, who are the Jewish people? It doesn't say they put on tefillin every day, they keep Shabbos. It of course assumes that people put on tefillin every day. All right, but that's not the point. That's not the characteristic that marks what the Jew is and who we are to be. Moreover, there's a Deuteronomic verse that basically says that people should be able to look at you and understand that this is a wise and discerning people in the service of God because of your practice, because of your character. So we carry with us that responsibility to make sure that as we enter the world, we reflect those values in our being. That's what's called the image of God, that we are responsible for carrying with us. Exile taught the Jew a heightened form of ethical sensitivity. Jewish law is intended to transform the Israelite, the Jew, into a Rahman, into a compassionate person. That's what it means to be a Jew, who has ingrained within a degree of humility about who we are, because we've had this exilic experience. We know we're not the greatest. We know that. It's important for us to keep on telling that to us. We're not the greatest, right? And we developed an antipathy to the abuse of power. I mean, that's part of our character. To be a religious Jew, one must be ethical. Ethics and religion are one. I mean, that's the lesson of Soloveitch and of Hermann Cohen. That's the message they carried. And by the way, that's the message of Maimonides. That's what you see in the Guide of the Perplexed, that you see that's where he's going, and that he wants to induce within us a sensitivity to the moral dimension of the religious life. And he's basically making an argument both to religious people and to philosophers. Religious people, and I'm going to come to this in a moment, have to understand the values that are inherent in their religious practices. And philosophers have to understand that religious practices can be an aid to living the moral life, and that ideas alone are insufficient because ideas need to be expressed. They become orphans if they're not concretized. So halacha, from this perspective, this is my language, is a delivery system. Jewish law is a delivery system for how values become a part of us. Because otherwise, we discuss the values, they're beautiful, it's nice to have peace, but what does that mean? Shabbat Shalom. What does it mean to take Shabbat Shalom and bring that into the week? Does it have implications for how we live with one another? Does it have, if you say Shabbat Shalom to one another, does it have implications for how you live with the other? Are you in Shalom with the other who lives next door to you? And that has political ramifications. Or else don't say Shalom, because Shalom is the name of God. That's a desecration. You want to say Shalom, then pursue peace. And you actively pursue peace. That's the mitzvah. So the life of mitzvah, the ethical dimension, the ritual dimension, they're all one. You can't separate them. That's where I'm going. This is Soloveitchik's ideology. Right? Now, before I go ahead with some of Maimonides' teaching, I thought I might just reflect on some religious practice and on the structure of that, and on some sort of very, very inspiring passages of learning. It's in the Hebrew. I'll summarize in English. I'm sorry I didn't have time to translate it. So as follows. First of all, Levinas, although I'm not that familiar with all of his writings, but I know basic principle. Basic principle of Emmanuel Levinas, the French Jewish philosopher, is you cannot behold God's presence until you engage with your fellow. You can't behold God's presence until you engage with your re'ah, hafta l're'acha kamocha, with one's fellow. Now, the Kabbalists said it in a wonderful way. Why is the minyan constructed by 10? Because 10 reflects the 10 dimensions of God, the Sefirot, the emanations. So when 10 come together, when 10 human beings come together, they make up God's presence. Right? I mean, this is Buber talk this way. God is not some, I mean, at least the way we experience God, some out there. God is what we make in the way in which we live. And it's not an accident, and this I brought to you, that Isaac Luria, the great Kabbalist of the 16th century Tzfat, Ha'ari, that's the abbreviation of his name, the great lion, but Ha'elohi, Ari stands for Ha'elohi Rabbi Yitzchak, the divine Rabbi Isaac. So he taught that we should recite a meditation before prayer. Now I adapted it. This is my adaptation, and I'll translate. And I say this every morning. Hareini mikaber alai mitzvat aseh shel v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Before I pray, before I start my daily davening, I say, I hereby accept upon myself the commandment to love my neighbor as myself. And I hereby attempt, mishtadel, le'ahov kol Yisrael, to love every Jew, v'chol adam v'chava, and every Adam and Eve and every human being, v'chol nafshi, with all my being, with all my soul and with all my being, v'chol nafshi, v'chol ma'odi. So, if you think about it, how wonderful it is. You can't face God in prayer until you face your fellow human being, because your fellow human being is a reflection of God's presence. So what you need to do, a lot of us, though, we stop searching for God out there and look for God right next door. I mean, the dimension of God, and connect to that. That doesn't mean, I don't want to preclude the possibility of spiritual experience, but I just want to talk about basics. That's the foundation. The grounding of our religious life is in our ethical commitment to one another, and in creating that sense of oneness among us, among ourselves, that reflects the oneness of God. That's the desire. So Isaiah Horowitz, another 16th century mystic, said the following. It's beautiful. He counted the letters in the 10 Commandments, and they amounted to 620. Why 620? There's 613 commandments that were given to the Jews, so to speak, Taryag mitzvot, and the 7 could be the 7 Noahide laws. He's not clear. He says it could be any number of things. But the most important part of the 7 is that the 7 correspond to the 7 last letters in the 620 letter 10 Commandments. And here you have this. I'm going to read the line in Hebrew. V'hinei katvu hamechabrim. I'm sorry. No, that's the wrong line here. Omnam. However, hamachvar shebekulam, the clearest of them all, right? Who? Explanation. Mash about the 7. Mashahivanti midivrei hatzioni. That's an earlier mystic, a medieval mystic. Sheomer ma heim hazayin otiyot shenisharu. What are the 7 letters that remain from the 620? Right? If you take away 613 for the 613 commandments, Haim Asher L'Reacha, the last 7 letters of the 10 commandments spell unto your neighbor. And the point is that all 613 commandments rest on the foundation of unto your neighbor. I can't say it any more beautifully. I can't say it any more convincingly in a way. I mean, this is a type of amazing representation of how Jewish teachers attempted to read into the text. I mean, obviously, right there, this is an interpretive technique here. But the point is, what the value that they're deriving is. Don't think that you could be a wholly devoted to God if you don't understand Asher L'Reacha, unto your neighbor. You'll build God into our lives in this world. That's your obligation, and demonstrate to people the possibility of holiness in interpersonal relationships and interpersonal actions, not necessarily in ritual behaviors, not only in ritual behaviors. That's the point. Can you touch the holy when you're involved with your fellow human being? By that I mean something transcendent, something beyond what Buddha would call the I-it, where the subjective relationship that you have with one another is binds you to the person. Now you have that. We aspire to that in our most intimate relationships. Can we achieve some degree of that with others? Can we generate that in the world? That's the religious task. Now, to conclude, we have about 15 minutes, so I want to end with some Maimonides. I think we can do both of these texts. If not, I'll sort of speed through them. They're essential. So first, I want to talk about. Let me tell you about this text. Perry, Maimonides introduces the laws of slaves, basically because Maimonides has a universal law code that actually deals with sacrifice, deals with everything, even things that don't apply. He's simply representing the tradition as it was formulated with his own formulation. So here's one of the characteristics of Maimonides' code that people haven't noted sufficiently. I mean, my teacher Hartman noted it, and my friend Menachem Kellner just wrote a book. The book, which I recommend to you, the book is called Maimonides the Universalist. Maimonides the Universalist. I mean, what he does, what Kellner and Gillis do, is that they analyze the last paragraph in each one of the 14 books of Maimonides' law code, and each ending of these 14 books is philosophically reflective and theologically aspirational. That's what's so interesting. In other words, Maimonides wrote a law code whose intention it was to push the people who were committed to Jewish law and to observance beyond the mechanics of observance, to a life of reflection that not only understands what they're doing, but because they have internalized their understanding, actually it makes a difference in who they become as human beings. The problem with observance is that it's detached, and the people who are observant haven't internalized the values and the meaning of what they're doing. They just do. It becomes an act apart from them. Maimonides, as well as the mystics, wanted the people to sort of bring it inside So it becomes a part and parcel of who we are. Then we can hope that our character is going to be affected by it. Otherwise, it's just a type of performance that doesn't yield anything and maybe actually is negative, because the hypocrisy that results in the behavior is something that desecrates. All right. So here at the end of the laws of slavery, Maimonides does what I was describing before, and that's refining, reforming, limiting notions of slavery, because the whole point is to eradicate slavery. And I would say he was committed to that. So he writes as follows. I'll read here in English. It is permissible to work a heathen slave relentlessly. Very important. Relentlessly or with rigor in other translations, the Hebrew word is befarech. Maimonides takes this word from the description in Exodus that the Egyptians worked the Israelites befarech. It's senseless work. I once saw a play on Broadway, I think it was called Bent, I think so, and the characters were in a concentration camp, and the whole play, what the transaction in the play was that the characters were carrying stones from one side of the stage to the other side of the stage, all day long, endlessly, every single day. That's avodat parach. It's a dehumanizing form of work that says you're just an animal. Do what we tell you, your work has no meaning and no quality. He writes this far. So one is permitted to work a heathen slave relentlessly, meaning Maimonides is quoting the law. This, by the way, is how law is changed. Listen to this. It's great. Even though it is lawful to work the heathen slave, right? It's not lawful with a Jewish slave. That's a person who's a debtor, who sells himself. You can't do that. But for heathen, yes. Okay. Right. Maimonides says the quality of benevolence, actually the Hebrew word is piety, not benevolence, and the paths of wisdom demand of a human being to be merciful and striving for justice. One should not press his heavy yoke on his slave and torment him, but should give him to eat and to drink of everything. So the first thing is treat him like a human being. Give him a sense of dignity. The sages of old were in the habit of sharing with the slave every dish they ate, and they fed the cattle as well as the slaves before they themselves sat down to eat. So this is very interesting. And we have a lot of evidence from the Talmud about the behavior of the sages. First of all, he introduces this not only as a way of piety, which is sort of extra legal, but as a way of wisdom. The way of wisdom is a mandated way. So Maimonides is introducing trouble here. He says, the Torah says you're allowed to do this. I say that you can't do this. Who are you? I say you can't do this because this doesn't reflect the values of the Torah. Meaning, Maimonides is using the values of the Torah against the law of the Torah. That's the way revolutionary ideas are introduced, through the legal tradition, through the practice tradition, and how we understand what are the priorities, what are the Jewish priorities. So the ethics takes priority over what's legally permissible, and refine and reform and reframe what's permissible in this context. Here, and the other thing that's interesting here is not only sharing food with slaves, but also with animals. You know, that there's a sense that all of nature has rights, you know, and that animals too are God's creation, are God's creations. And we have to see them in that regard. And Maimonides in his philosophic work in the Guide says explicitly, don't be an arrogant human being and think that all those things were created for you to use. They have value in and of themselves. Human beings think the world was created for them. The purpose of the world was for us to make use of the world. And look what we've done with the world that we've been given to use. We abuse, not use. Because we don't have an understanding of our own limitations. We think it's here for us. It's ours. No, those things have value in and of themselves. Nor should a master disgrace his servant by hand or by words. The biblical law surrendered them to servitude, but not to disgrace. He should not madly scream at his servant, but speak to him gently and listen to his complaints. Now, what's interesting here, let me read to you. He quotes a verse from Job. This translation skipped. That's what this ellipse is here. verse is, if I did despise the cause, if I did despise the cause of my manservant, and then there's a phrase about the maidservant, did not God that made me in the womb make him? And did not one fashion us in the womb? Meaning all of us, the master and the slave, we were all fashioned simultaneously in the womb. No one has rights over the other. There's no hierarchy of value. There's a sense of equality that emerges from the idea of creation. So again, what's creation all about? Creation is not so much to make God important and to claim God created the world. Creation is about saying that all of us were created by God, meaning we're all equal potentially. We all have similar capacity. And no one should claim that inherently they have more value than someone else. And because we have potential for equality, we have to try to maintain as much equality as possible, as we can. Right? It's inevitable that there are going to be all sorts of exceptions, but that seems to be the program. All right, cruelty is frequently to be found only among heathen who worship idols. Now, this is based on a censored translation. It says the uncircumcised, and Kellner in his book says that uncircumcised in this phrase here reflects the verse already in Deuteronomy and later in the prophets, the uncircumcised of heart. So although it says heathen, there's an intimation that the uncircumcised of heart could also be a Jew, right? If you're not soft, if you don't have a place if you're not compassionate, right? If you don't have a place for the vulnerable, then you have an uncircumcised heart. Cruelty is frequently to be found only among the heathen and the uncircumcised. The early printings of Maimonides don't say idolatry. That's the Christian censor changed the text, so it wouldn't be insulting to Christians. All right, uncircumcised was seen as being Christians, but they made a mistake, because uncircumcised can intimate, Jews who are not moral. The progeny of our father Abraham, however, the people of Israel, upon whom God bestowed the goodness of the Torah, commanding them to keep the laws of goodness and are merciful toward all creatures. All creatures, whether they're workers or whether they're animals. So too, in speaking of the divine attributes, which He has commanded us to imitate, the psalmist says, God's mercy is over all of God's works. So what does that mean? So in other words, we are told that creation implants within us a sense of equality. Therefore, you shouldn't lord over any human being. There's no one who's worth or more valuable than anybody else, right? We're told that that the sense of propriety, of caring about those who are seemingly less powerful than us, that we need, that we have an obligation to take care of them before we take care of ourselves. And then finally, we're told that there's a primary commandment to imitate God. God has mercy for all of God's creations. The way in which God's mercy is realized in the world is if we express that mercy, if we develop the merciful personality. When we develop our own merciful personalities, we're reflecting the notion that God is merciful to all. Whoever is merciful will receive mercy. That means if you act in a merciful way continuously, and you train your character to be compassionate, so that mercy becomes second nature, it will be as if God gave you the gift of mercy. That's how I interpret this. It's not that when you're merciful, you're going to get a reward. That's not what it's all about. It's about understanding that acting in a merciful way inculcates within you. This is what it trains you to look at the world in a particular way, and you develop that character. That's what's called developing a virtuous personality, because virtue is the goal. And virtue in terms, at least in terms of the ideal, is something that we should train ourselves to attain so that it's reflected in our very being. Something that, as I said earlier, it's a lifelong task. And I think I've reached 6:30, but I want to ask you for 2 more minutes, if I might. I'm sorry for violating the limits of time, but just this last teaching, which some of you may be familiar with, but it's worth it just to hear Maimonides. He tells us something really striking. I'm going to read from the middle here. If one denies the binding character of the commandment relating to measures, the end of Leviticus 19 ends with the following teaching. Have Moznei Tzedek Abnei Tzedek. You should have just weights and measures. I'm the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. So the rabbis say, what's the relationship between honest weights and measures and the Exodus? So the Maimonides says the relationship is, if one denies the binding character of the commandment relating to weights and measures, one denies in effect the Exodus from Egypt, which was the basis of the commandments. Meaning, as I've been teaching, Egypt is foundational. Our experience as slaves framed the ethical impulse, which was translated into the legal practice, the mitzvot of Judaism, to recollect who we are and to build our character. If we don't develop that character, then we didn't leave Egypt. If one acknowledges the commandment relating to measures, one thereby acknowledges the exodus from Egypt, which rendered all the commandments possible. So you can claim to be a religious Jew, but if you don't have business ethics, you're not honest, you don't treat people equitably, then you have violated the covenant. And you have violated in many ways, you've stained your identity. And your Jewishness is being questioned here. You can't be a religious person if your religiosity is not suffused with ethical commitments. And you have to try to generate a life where the two of them are interwoven. One last word about that, because I know some people will have a question about what, if I'm ethical, what do I need the religious? And although I can't claim that the only way to be ethical is to be religious, I can say the following, that a conscious sense of God is critical, I think, to developing a humble personality or to inculcating a sense of humility. Knowing that I am not God, right? I've taught this before. It's not that I have to believe in God. I have to know that I'm not God. We see in our politicians, right? It's so evident all over the world. They don't know that they're not God, right? Someone hasn't taught them that, or they don't want to know. They don't want to know that, right? That's why we have to carry that teaching. Once we know that we're not God, then we can aspire to be godly by reflecting the divine image within us and fulfilling our mandate, which is our mission to reflect equality and morality in the way in which we live as Jews. And the celebration of Passover has been the delivery system throughout Jewish history for giving the Jews their program. Take the memory of the Exodus and make it something that's part of your daily lives. When you interact with other people, know who you are. Know your humble beginnings. Know that you are equal to all others. Know that you have to try to achieve shalom with all the people around you and recognize them as your Reah, as your neighbor in whom God's presence is reflected. Thank you, and I'll see you next week. Take care. If you have any questions, please send me email chaimsf@ucla.edu and add a phone number, because sometimes I actually call you back. Take care. Thank you, Giselle.
My pleasure. Let's see here, I'll stop the recording.